Hello again, Psych 370 students, and welcome to another video lecture for week 13. In my last video lecture, I started covering punishment with you by going over some of the variables that influence the effectiveness of a punisher. But like I told you at the end of that video lecture, even though punishers do work, even though they are effective at decreasing the behaviors that they follow, they also bring a lot of baggage with them. In other words, there are a number of problematic side effects that can result from the use of punishment. So in this video lecture, which is part of a Zoom class from last year, I'll be going over some of those problems that are associated with punishment. First of all, guys, one potential problem with the use of positive punishers in particular is that it can result in fear being acquired as a conditioned response to either the person who administers the punisher or the situation, the setting in which the punisher occurs. Okay. And guys, that's just classical conditioning, right? So obviously many positive punishers, like spankings and scoldings, tend to elicit fear, right? I mean, they just do that naturally. They function like unconditioned stimuli in that regard. And you're pairing that punisher up with a certain person or a certain environment, right? And so eventually that person or that environment, that setting, could get converted into a conditioned stimulus that also elicits fear. Okay. So for example, after a few spankings, a child may come to fear their parent, right? Because now they associate the parent with the spankings. And so punishment has the potential to damage the relationship between a parent and a child. I don't think any parent wants their child to fear them, but they could come to fear them if they associate the parent with these painful, scary spankings, right? We can say the same thing about using punishers with pets. I mean, if you hit your dog for chewing on stuff, then it might stop chewing on stuff, but it'll probably also become afraid of you too, because it'll associate you with getting hit. It's classical conditioning, right? And the use of positive punishers in schools, which amazingly is still legal in like 19 states. Corporal punishment is still legal in a lot of states in the US. But the use of positive punishers in schools may actually lead to a student dropping out of school, right? Avoiding school entirely because now they fear their teacher or the school environment itself or whatever. And obviously, if that happens, then your use of punishment has just totally backfired, right? I mean, you would have been using punishment in the school to presumably get students to stop doing things that hamper their ability to get a good education, right? But now, as a result of the punishment, now they're not getting an education at all, right? Total backfire. So anyway, conditioned fear is definitely one problematic side effect of punishment. And guys, the use of punishment can also backfire if its effects wind up being too widespread. So look, punishment can be fairly precise, okay? This is another thing that Skinner thought about punishment. He's like, well, it just produces this general suppression of behavior. And that's not true. It can produce more precise decreases. It can decrease one specific behavior while leaving others intact. But Skinner was right in that it's definitely possible for punishment to produce a more general suppression of a person's or an animal's behavior, okay? So for example, if you punish a child for playing too roughly with their classmates, then what you're probably hoping they'll do is start to play more nicely with those classmates, right? But especially if you're not reinforcing that nicer way of playing, especially if you're not reinforcing that alternative, like I talked about earlier, then what the kid might do instead is just stop playing with other kids entirely, right? Which is obviously not at all what you want. So punishers can also have that side effect, right? The person or animal might just figure that the safest, most surefire way to avoid the punisher is just to do nothing at all, right? And so as a result, yeah, you could see this sort of general overall suppression of their behavior, which again is not really at all what you would have intended to produce. Okay. So it's another problem with punishment, right? People could act sort of resigned and just not do anything. They just get this generalized suppression of behavior. Another problem that a lot of people have with punishment is that rather than teaching the person you're punishing to behave appropriately, what it might do instead is teach them how to get away with this behavior that you're trying to punish, okay? So in other words, the individual could learn to discriminate between situations in which the behavior typically gets punished and situations in which it doesn't tend to get punished, okay? And of course, that's especially likely to be the case if there are any discriminative stimuli, right, in the person's environment that signal when a behavior is likely to produce the punisher and when it isn't. So for example, if a student has been punished for cheating on tests in school, then what that student might learn is, okay, well, when the teacher is watching me, when that discriminative stimulus is present, then that's when cheating gets punished. But if the teacher's not watching me, if that discriminative stimulus is absent, like if the teacher has their back turned, if they've left the room for a minute or whatever, then I can cheat. Then I can perform this behavior, and this punisher is not going to occur as a consequence. So in that case, rather than learning not to cheat, which is what we would have been going for, what the kid has really learned instead is how to avoid the punisher, right? And so in other words, using punishment here didn't really create a more honest student, which again is what we would have been going for. It just created a more clever cheater, right? So with that side effect in mind, I'm going to launch one more poll here. There it goes. You should be seeing that now. So which of these would not be a reason why we would prefer to avoid the use of punishment? So three of these statements are true. One of them's false. So you basically just got to pick out the false one. Okay, so like I said earlier, punishers are more effective than simple extinction as far as weakening a behavior. So that's not a reason why we prefer to avoid the use of punishment. But all these others are. I mean, they can cause that generalized suppression of behavior where the person or animal just does nothing at all. They can lead to that conditioned fear because of the pairings of the person or the environment with this painful, scary punisher. And again, they can teach discrimination between situations where the person can basically figure out how to circumvent the punisher and get away with the undesirable behavior. So that's another problem with punishment. And of course, one of the most common complaints about punishment, another important side effect of it, is that it can also lead to aggression. Now, I talked last week about how extinction can bring on aggressive behavior through frustration. So when a formally reinforced behavior stops getting reinforced, people often get frustrated and they react aggressively. But pain, which many punishers also elicit, can do the same kind of thing with aggression. So for example, if you put two rats together in a cage and shock them, if you make them both experience pain, it's on. They're going to attack each other. Okay, so pain can bring on aggressive behavior like that. And not only can pain and frustration bring on aggression in general, they can also elicit what's called displaced aggression, which is where the aggressive behavior actually gets directed toward a target that had nothing to do with the pain and the frustration. So for example, if a rat gets shocked, it'll attack another rat, even if that other rat had nothing to do with why it got shocked. In fact, it'll attack another rat that wasn't even there at the time it got shocked. So we call that displaced aggression, right? If an older brother gets punished by his parents, he might go and beat up his younger brother, even though his younger brother had nothing to do with why he got punished. So he's displacing the aggression, right? He's redirecting it from who he's actually mad at to this other person. Yeah. So pain and frustration can bring on aggressive behavior. And besides pain and frustration, another way that punishment can lead to aggression would be by way of observational learning, which we'll talk about in more detail in the coming weeks. So especially after a physical form of punishment, like a spanking, a child might learn not only to imitate the use of punishment in their own interactions with their peers, but they might also learn that aggressive, violent behavior isn't appropriate an effective way of dealing with other people. And so they might come to model that behavior after that. Okay. So there are several avenues by which the use of punishment can result in aggressive behavior by the person or animal being punished. And then finally, guys, one last related problem with punishment is that it can also lead to abusive behavior by the person who administers the punisher. So as your book points out, many instances of physical abuse can be understood as attempts to punish a behavior that have simply gone too far. For example, fairly recently, a major story in the sports world involved the star running back for the Minnesota Vikings, named Adrian Peterson, who admitted to punishing his 4-year-old son by striking the boy repeatedly with a tree branch, which Peterson referred to as a switch. Okay. And as you can see here in these pictures, the boy was left with cuts and swelling in several places on his body. And when photographs of the incident were released to the public, Peterson was suspended from the NFL for the rest of the season. Okay. However, in his defense, Peterson's lawyer made a statement that read like this. He said, Adrian is a loving father who used his judgment as a parent to discipline his son. He used the same kind of discipline with his child that he experienced as a child growing up in East Texas. But it's important to remember that Adrian never intended to harm his son, and he deeply regrets the unintentional injury. So if you ask Mr. Peterson, his behavior was just an attempt to punish his son for behavior that he felt like it was his responsibility as the boy's father to modify. Right? That's what he was trying to do. He was trying to punish the child. Right? But obviously most people, including Peterson's employer, the NFL, they found that his way of doing that was too extreme and they characterized it as abusive. Now, where to draw the line between discipline and abuse is clearly not a straightforward issue, right? It's clearly subjective. But the point is that the use of punishment, especially the use of physical, positive forms of punishment, brings with it the possibility that what starts out as an attempt to just modify a problematic behavior could escalate and actually endanger the person or animal who's being punished. Okay, so guys, these are not trivial side effects that we're talking about with punishment. These are serious problems that the use of punishment can lead to. And so people have obviously explored alternatives to punishment, and I'll cover a few of those alternatives with you in my next video lecture. That's going to do it for this one, though. So as always, please let me know if you have any questions, and I'll catch you next time. Take care.